It was just after sunset when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel road outside my cabin. The air was still, the kind of quiet that makes every sound feel louder than it should. I hadn't invited anyone, and out here in the middle of nowhere, unannounced visitors were rare. Through the thin curtains, I caught the glint of a badge at least. That's what I thought it was at first. A man in a dark uniform stepped out of an unmarked SUV, moving with the kind of confidence you'd expect from law enforcement. But something in my gut told me this wasn't right. For weeks, my HOA had been on my back over a $4,200 fine. They claimed I'd violated some obscure landscaping rule, even though my property looked the same as it had for years. I'd ignored their threats, figuring it would all blow over. But this felt different. The man outside wasn't here to talk. His hand rested near his hip, and his eyes kept darting toward the cabin windows. What he didn't know was that I wasn't alone. Inside, quietly tucked away, were 3 U.S. Marshalsmen I'd known for years through a personal favor that had nothing to do with the HOA. They weren't here on official business. At least not yet, but they had been keeping an eye on me. After some suspicious events in town, the man knocked sharp, quick raps that sent a shiver down my spine. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. The Marshals exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from casual to alert in an instant. One of them moved toward the door while the others positioned themselves out of sight. Outside, a man called my name in a tone that tried to sound official but carried an edge of impatience. I took a slow breath, knowing that whatever happened next could change everything. The question was, had the HOA really sent this man? Or was there something even more dangerous waiting just beyond that door? I stayed frozen for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Through the narrow gap in the curtain, I studied him more closely. His uniform didn't match any local department I knew, and there was no visible name tag, just a shiny emblem. That looked convincing enough from a distance, but slightly off up close. His SUV had no license plate on the front, and the back plate was covered with dust, as if on purpose. In my mind, pieces of the past few weeks started fitting together. First, there were the strange phone calls numbers I didn't recognize, with someone breathing quietly before hanging up. Then came the letters from the HOA, each one worded more aggressively than the last. The final letter had said, "We will take necessary action if you continue to ignore this matter." At the time, I laughed it off. Now, it didn't seem so funny. The Marshals had been staying at my cabin under the guise of an old hunting trip. They'd said they wanted to keep an eye on a situation in the area, but they never gave me the full details. All I knew was that they were armed, trained, and very, very good at reading danger. One Marshal, a tall guy named Carter, leaned close and whispered, "He's not law enforcement. Look at the stance, too aggressive. He's here for something else." My pulse quickened. If Carter was this certain, it meant the risk was real. The knock came again, harder this time. My wooden door rattled in its frame. Outside, the man glanced over his shoulder at the tree line, as if expecting someone or something to arrive. Somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't about a fine anymore. This was about to turn into something much bigger. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. I kept my voice low as I asked Carter what he thought this man wanted. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned for me to step back from the door and gave a subtle signal to the other 2 Marshals. They moved with quiet precision, one slipping toward the back window to get a better angle, the other staying in the shadows by the hallway. The tension inside the cabin was so thick, I could almost hear it hum. I thought back to how all this started. The HOA had always been strict, but in the past, their threats were just words on paper. This time, it felt different from the moment they claimed my cabin didn't meet community standards. The fine was outrageous $4,200 for what they take, called unsanctioned modifications, though they never explained what that meant. I'd built this cabin myself, every plank and nail, long before the HOA decided to expand its jurisdiction. Into this part of the mountain, the phone calls began a few days after I ignored their deadline. At first, it was just silence on the line. Then one call had a low voice saying, "You should take this seriously," before hanging up. I had brushed it off, but the Marshals didn't. They'd shown up 2 days later, saying they were in the area and wanted to stay a while. Now, looking at the figure outside, I realized this wasn't some coincidence. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his eyes scanning the cabin like he was mapping it out in his head. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth knot, the kind that made you feel safe. Carter leaned closer to the door, his hand resting lightly on the knob. "He's waiting for something," he murmured. And that's when the sound of another engine echoed faintly from the road below. The man outside didn't make a move toward the door. Instead, he stepped back, his eyes darting toward the tree line like he'd just spotted something unexpected. Carter noticed it too. His jaw tightened, and he shifted his stance ever so slightly. The Marshals weren't just watching him anymore. They were scanning the woods. That's when I saw it's another faint light. It's one bobbing between the trees, moving closer to the cabin from a completely different angle. It wasn't a flashlight like law enforcement would carry. The glow was softer, almost yellow, and it moved in short, deliberate bursts, pausing every few seconds. Whoever it was, they weren't using the road. Carter muttered under his breath, "We've got more than one problem." His voice was low, steady, but there was an edge to it I hadn't heard before. The other Marshals adjusted their positions, one slipping toward the loft to get a higher vantage point, the other staying near the back with eyes fixed on the dark stretch of forest outside. The first man kept glancing between the second vehicle and the tree line, as if he was caught in the middle of two separate plans colliding. The air felt heavier now, thick with the kind of tension that made my skin prickle. The sound of footsteps crunching in the underbrush joined the low purr of the idling engine. The yellow light stopped moving, and a shadowed figure emerged at the edge of the clearing just far enough away that I couldn't make out their face. They stood there, perfectly still, watching. Carter turned his head slightly toward me without taking his eyes off the scene. "This isn't just the HOA anymore," he said. "Something else is in play." And then, almost on cue, the cabin's power flickered once, twice before everything went completely dark. The darkness inside the cabin was immediate and absolute, broken only by the faint glow of moonlight slipping through the curtains. I could hear my own breathing, quick and uneven, and the faint creak of the floorboards as the Marshals moved into position. Outside, the engine of the second vehicle went silent, and for a moment, the world felt like it was holding still. Then, it happened. The front door shook violently as the man outside tried the handle. Carter was already there, pulling me back and swinging the door open with a force that caught the intruder off guard. Before he could react, the other Marshals stepped in from both sides, their voices sharp and commanding, instantly taking control. The fake badge clattered to the porch as the man's hands went up from the tree line. The shadowed figure with the yellow light stepped forward only to be met by the third Marshal, who had circled around in the dark without a sound. In the dim light, I saw the face clearly for the first time. It wasn't someone I recognized, but Carter did. His expression shifted from tense to something sharper. "I knew it," he muttered. It turned out the HOA fine was never the real issue. The man with the fake badge had been hired as a distraction, meant to keep my attention on the front door while the other figure tried to access the cabin from the woods. The Marshals had intercepted both, uncovering that the HOA president had been covering for someone running illegal deals out of the mountains, and my property sat right in their path. Just when I thought it was over, Carter glanced past me toward the back of the cabin. "Stay inside," he warned. "We've got movement again." I turned, my pulse spiking, and saw a third shadow slipping through the trees, someone no one had noticed until that very moment. The Marshals moved fast, fanning out toward the trees while Carter stayed close to me. The figure in the shadows hesitated, realizing they'd been spotted, then bolted toward the road. I heard the crunch of boots on gravel, the sharp commands of trained voices, and within seconds, the night was still again when they returned. Carter explained that the third person had been watching the cabin for days, waiting for the right moment. They weren't part of the fake cops' plan or the yellow light intruders. They were working for someone else entirely, hoping to grab documents stored in my cabin that tied into the HOA president's hidden dealings. That was why the Marshals had stayed close from the start. They already suspected my property had become a piece of a much bigger puzzle by the time the real local authorities arrived. The Marshals had everything under control. The suspects were handed over, evidence was secured, and the story the HOA had built around my $4,200 fine completely unraveled. It turned out the fine had been nothing more than leverage, a way to pressure me into leaving so others could quietly use the land. In the quiet that